The alert came at the worst possible time. Grand Admiral Sarath Khan was in the middle of a formal dinner with three senators in the High Commander of the Western Fleet when his personal communicator buzzed against his wrist. He ignored it the first time. He ignored it the second time. When it buzzed a third time in less than a minute, he excused himself from the table, stepped out onto the widest balcony of the Imperial Palace, and answered it. The voice on the other end belonged to his night watch officer, a young male named Corbin, and the voice was shaking. That was the first sign something was very wrong. Corbin had been working the night desk for 11 years. Sarath Khan had never heard him shake before. "Admiral," Corbin said, "we have lost contact with Border Patrol Cruiser 794. Last known position, the Outer Vale Sector. The final transmission came in 12 minutes ago. Sir, you need to see what they sent." Sarath Khan stood on the balcony and looked out over the lights of Velkara, the throne world of the Dominion Empire, stretched out before him in every direction. Towers of white stone and blue glass reaching up into the night sky, the glow of 10 million lights reflecting off low clouds, the distant hum of the city that never truly slept. It was the most powerful planet in 14,000 star systems. It had not been threatened in 600 years. "Send it to my personal screen," he said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." He was there in 12. The Imperial Fleet Command Center sat deep beneath the palace, carved into the bedrock of the planet itself. It was a vast circular room filled with holographic displays, rows of analysts at their stations, and the quiet, constant noise of data flowing in from every corner of the Dominion's territory. Sarath Khan had spent more of his life in this room than anywhere else. He knew every light on every panel. He knew the difference between a normal alert and a serious one just from the color of the indicators. Tonight, the indicators were a color he had not seen in a very long time. Red. Deep, solid red. Not the flashing red of a minor emergency, the steady red of something that had already happened and could not be undone. Corbin met him at the door and led him directly to the central display without saying a word. The other analysts at their stations were quiet. Not too quiet. They were all watching him. That was another bad sign. The image on the central display was grainy and broken. It had clearly been captured in a hurry, pulled from the border cruiser's external sensor array in the last seconds before transmission was cut off. Parts of it were blurred by static, parts of it were simply missing, replaced by dark blocks where the data had been corrupted. But enough of it was there. Sarath Khan looked at the image for a long time without speaking. It was a ship, that much was certain, but it was unlike any ship he had ever seen in 40 years of naval service. It was enormous. The size comparison markers, automatically generated by the sensor system, showed it to be nearly twice the length of a Dominion heavy dreadnought, which was itself the largest class of vessel in the Imperial fleet. But it wasn't just the size that stopped him, it was the shape. Every spacefaring civilization the Dominion had ever encountered built ships that were smooth, curved, aerodynamic in form, even where aerodynamics meant nothing in the vacuum of space. It was simply what intelligent minds tended toward: clean lines, elegant shapes, ships that looked as though they belonged among the stars. This thing looked like it had been built to survive them. It was angular and hard-edged, all flat plates and sharp corners. Its hull was dark, not painted dark, but dark the way old iron gets dark after it has been through fire. Scarred, burned in places, marked with lines of damage that had been repaired and then damaged again and repaired again, so many times that the repairs themselves had become part of the hull. Long, deep grooves ran along its sides, the kind of marks left by weapons that had grazed it but not killed it. There were areas where the plating had been replaced so many times that the colors didn't match. It created a patchwork look that somehow made it look more dangerous, not less. The ship was moving. Even in the still image, the sensor data showed velocity markers that made Sarath Khan's jaw tighten. It was traveling at a speed that should have been impossible for something that size, and it was heading inward toward populated space. On the lower section of the hull, barely visible through the damage and the age and the grime of what looked like years in deep space, there were markings and characters in some unknown script cut deep into the metal. "Has anyone been able to read that?" Sarath Khan asked. "We sent it to the Xenolinguistics Division as soon as we received the transmission," Corbin said. "They're working on it now." "What destroyed the cruiser?" Corbin hesitated. "We don't know that it was destroyed, sir. There was no explosion recorded, no debris field detected. The transmission simply stopped. The ship went silent." Sarath Khan looked at the image again. "What was the cruiser's crew complement?" 240, sir." Nobody in the room said anything. The Xenolinguistics team worked through the night. They were a small division, mostly academics who had been folded into Imperial intelligence because the Dominion occasionally encountered ruins of dead civilizations during its expansion and needed someone to make sense of what they found. They were used to working on fragments of ancient texts, carved stones, and man-data chips recovered from long-dead ships. They were not used to being woken at midnight and told to decipher something as a matter of urgent military priority. But they worked, and by the time the first pale light of dawn was beginning to show above the Velkara skyline, a senior linguist named Dessa made a discovery that made her stop completely and simply stare at her screen for several long seconds before she called her director. The script on the hull was not in any active database as that was expected, but it wasn't entirely unknown either. Dessa had run it through every archive the Dominion possessed, including the deep archives where old, forgotten data went to collect dust, and she had found a partial match. 3 characters out of what appeared to be a longer sequence. The match came from a report filed 312 years ago by a long-range exploration probe that had been sent into a region of space far beyond the Dominion's borders. A tiny satellite galaxy orbiting on the edge of the larger galactic structure that the Dominion called home. The probe had detected unusual energy signatures and had captured images of what appeared to be debris from some kind of conflict. Among the debris were fragments of hull plating. The probe had photographed the fragments before being destroyed by a piece of fast-moving wreckage. The images had been filed, archived, and entirely forgotten about for 3 centuries. The characters on those ancient hull fragments matched 3 of the characters on the ship in the border sensor image. Dessa's hands were not quite shady when she typed up her report. She cross-referenced the match 3 times before she included it. She was a careful person by nature, and she didn't want to cause a panic over a coincidence. But it wasn't a coincidence. She was sure of that. The script was too specific, too consistent. This was the same written language. Whatever was in that satellite galaxy 300 years ago, and whatever was now moving through the outer veil at an impossible speed, came from the same place. She flagged the single segment of text that her algorithms had been able to partially process. 4 characters, 1 partial word, UNSC. She didn't know what it meant. Her algorithms didn't know what it meant, but it was a name, or part of one, and now it had a face. A massive, scarred, fast-moving face that had just silenced a 240-person Border Patrol cruiser without leaving a debris field. She sent her report to the Admiral's office and went to make herself a cup of something hot because she suspected it was going to be a very long day. Sarath Khan read the report twice. Then he called in his senior staff. By mid-morning, the entire upper command of the Imperial fleet was gathered in the main briefing room beneath the palace. Maps covered every wall. The grainy image of the unknown vessel was displayed at the front of the room, enlarged and enhanced as much as the original data allowed. It didn't look any less alarming at a larger size. Sarath Khan stood at the head of the table and went through everything they knew, which was not much. Unknown vessel, unknown origin, satellite galaxy, possibly, or something connected to one, speed and size beyond current Dominion capability, border cruisers silenced without debris, moving toward populated space. Rate of travel suggested it would reach the first inhabited system in the Veil Corridor in approximately 3 days. Recommendations, he said. The room gave him several. They ranged from immediate diplomatic contact, proposed by exactly one young intelligence officer named Vel, who everyone else in the room visibly disagreed with, to full military interception by the largest force they could assemble in the available time. The military option won. It wasn't even close. Sarath Khan authorized the deployment of Battle Group Harris, 40 warships, including 6 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyer-class vessels, and the rest a mix of combat frigates and support craft. It was a serious force. It had pacified rebellious systems before. It had destroyed pirate fleets and broken the navies of civilizations that made the mistake of challenging the Dominion. 40 ships against 1. The math seemed reasonable. The math seemed, in fact, overwhelmingly in the Dominion's favor. Fleet Admiral Harris himself took command of the group. He was a hard man, experienced and decorated, and he had the confidence of someone who... It had destroyed the entire battle group in less than 20 minutes, and it was simply drifting, as if it was taking stock of what had happened, or looking for something. Venta had her recording equipment running. She had activated it the moment the battle started because she was a sensor officer, and recording things was what she did, and also because some part of her had understood very quickly that what was happening was something that needed to be recorded. Even if nobody ever retrieved the pod, even if the air ran out before anyone found her, the record needed to exist. So she watched, and she recorded, and she tried to understand what she was seeing. The battle, if it could be called that, had not started the way battles usually started. Battle Group Harris had found the unknown vessel exactly where the projections said it would be, crossing the midpoint of the Veil corridor at a steady pace. The ship had been easy to detect. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't even trying to hide. It was broadcasting something, a signal on multiple frequencies, repeating on a regular cycle, the same pattern over and over. The Dominion communication analysts hadn't been able to decode it in the time available, but the pattern was clearly deliberate. It was clearly meant to be heard. Admiral Harris had been unmoved by the signal. He had his orders, and his orders were to stop the vessel before it reached inhabited space. He had arranged his 40 ships in a standard intercept formation, a wide net of warships designed to cut off any possible direction of escape, and had charged his weapons. In Ventus Station, on one of the cruisers, she had watched the unknown vessel on her sensor screen and noted something that she hadn't reported because there had been no time, and also because she hadn't been sure what it meant. The unknown vessel had detected them almost immediately. Its course had not changed, its speed had not changed, and its broadcast signal, that repeating, unknown pattern on multiple frequencies, had not changed either. It just kept broadcasting right up until the moment Admiral Harris gave the order to fire. The first salvo from 40 Dominion warships was, by any objective measure, tremendous. Plasma lances from the heavy cruisers hit the target with enough energy to melt a small moon. Mass driver rounds from the destroyer class punched through space at a fraction of the speed of light. Graviton bombs, the Dominion's most powerful conventional weapon, detonated in a spread pattern designed to shatter hull integrity across the entire length of the target vessel. All of it hit. Venta had watched her sensors and confirmed it. Every single weapon in that first salvo had connected with the unknown ship. The unknown ship had kept moving. Not unchanged, her sensors had registered impacts, heat blooms, stress readings along the hull. The weapons had done something, but the ship had not slowed, it had not broken apart. It had not done any of the things that ships did when 40 warships hit them all at once. There had been a pause of approximately 11 seconds after the first salvo, during those 11 seconds that the broadcast signal had stopped. Then the unknown ship had responded. Venta did not have complete footage of what happened next, because her recording equipment had been partially damaged when the ship she was on took its first hit. But she had enough. She had the sensor data, which told its own story with cold, complete numbers. She had partial visual from the external cameras before they went dark. She had audio of the bridge crew until the moment the bridge was hit, which the unknown ship had not fired in a wide spread the way the Dominion fleet had. It had not tried to hit everything at once. It had picked targets, one at a time, with a precision that was almost uncomfortable to watch on the sensor display. Heavy cruisers first, the most powerful ships in the formation, the ones that pose the greatest threat. Then the destroyer class, then the frigates. Methodical, efficient, not angry, not frantic, not the firing pattern of a crew panicking under attack. It was the firing pattern of a crew doing a job. The Dominion battle group lasted 19 minutes and 40 seconds. When the last Dominion ship went dark, the unknown ship had stopped firing immediately. Not gradually, not winding down, immediately, like turning off a light switch. The guns simply stopped, and the ship continued moving at the same steady pace it had maintained throughout, and the broadcast signal came back on. The same signal, the same repeating pattern, and like nothing had happened. Venta was watching through her porthole when the unknown ship came close enough that she could see its hull details without the aid of instruments. She pressed herself against the porthole glass like a child looking into a window, because even terrified and alone and very possibly about to die, she was a sensor officer and she couldn't help herself. The ship was even bigger up close than the sensor readings had suggested. It filled most of her field of view. She could see the repair work she had noted in the pre-battle briefing images, the mismatched hull plates, the old damage that had been patched over and then damaged again. There were places on the hull where she could count at least 4 distinct layers of repair work, each one overlapping the last. This ship had been through things, many things, over a long time, and every time it had been damaged, someone had fixed it and sent it that out. She was trying to figure out the scale of one of the larger repair patches. It looked like it might be older than the Dominion's current dynasty, when something happened that made her breath catch completely. A port opened in the side of the ship. Not a weapons port, something else, and a voice came out of it. Not through the emergency beacon's basic receiver, through the beacon's full communication system, which meant the ship had somehow identified the beacon's frequency and targeted it specifically. The voice was speaking in an unknown language. It was a recorded message, she realized, the same few seconds of speech repeating on a cycle, the same way the broadcast signal had been repeating. A different message, though. This one was specifically directed at her pod's frequency. They knew she was there. Then, after the unknown language message had repeated 3 times, something else came through. A face. On the tiny screen of her emergency communicator, a face appeared. She almost dropped the communicator. It was unlike any face she had ever seen. The being had 2 eyes forward-facing in a flat face with a protruding nose structure and a wide mouth. The skin was a pale brown color, and the face had lines in it, deep ones around the eyes and mouth, and the kind of lines that came from age and tiredness and spending a long time in places that were not kind to you. The hair, which grew directly from the top of the head in a way that Venta found deeply strange, was gray and cut short. The being looked directly at the camera. Its expression was hard to read. Venta had spent 3 years learning to read Dominion faces, and alien facial expressions were not something she had trained for. But she spent a long time looking at that face afterward and thinking about what she had seen. Later, she would decide that the expression was tired and sad and careful, the expression of someone who was working hard to make sure the next thing they did was the right thing. The being spoke. The words were unknown, but then the message shifted. A different tone, a more mechanical quality, and what came through were not words, but something else. A translation attempt. Rough, it clearly assembled from the fragments of Dominion language captured from the border cruiser and the battle group communications. Broken and incomplete, but structured with an obvious deliberate effort. We speak. No more fight. We are far, untranslatable. We are lost. We want talk. We want go home. Then the face again, the same tired, careful expression. And then one more word, alone, clearly considered the most important thing to convey. Please. The transmission ended. Venta sat in the dark of her escape pod, surrounded by the debris of 40 warships, and stared at the blank screen of her communicator for a very long time. Then she did her job. She checked her recording equipment. She confirmed that everything, every second of the battle, every sensor reading, every piece of footage she had been captured and was intact. She packaged the entire record into the highest priority transmission format the emergency beacon could produce. She added her own voice record, speaking quickly and precisely, describing what she had seen in the ordered, factual way that a sensor officer reported data. She included the face. She included the translated message. She included the word at the end. Then she transmitted everything she had back toward Sarathon, knowing it would take time to arrive, knowing she might not be alive to know if anyone received it. She hoped, very hard, that whoever eventually read her report would pay attention to all of it, not just the part about 40 destroyed warships. All of it. Inside the UNSC Adamantine Resolve, the mood was not celebratory. Captain Alar Voss stood at the central command console of the bridge and looked at the damage report on her screen without any visible expression. Around her, the crew moved with quiet efficiency of people who had been through worse and knew how to keep working when things were bad. The bridge of the Resolve was of practical space, everything functional, nothing decorative, every surface designed to be useful rather than impressive. It looked like what it was, the working environment of a ship that had been deployed for a long time. Breach in Section 7 is sealed. Wind hull integrity at 83% overall. Reactor 2 is showing some fluctuation, but within acceptable range. We lost 3 external sensor arrays on the port side. Minor casualties in the engineering section, nothing life-threatening. Voss listened without interrupting. When the report was finished, she nodded once. Get me a full list of what we expended. Mac rounds, Archer missiles, everything. I want the exact count. Yes, ma'am. She turned to her communications officer. The pod? Did we get a response? No verbal response, but it's still transmitting its beacon, so whoever is in there is still alive. We received... She dressed simply for a senator, always in plain dark cloth, no ceremonial decorations except the small silver pin of her home district that she wore on her left shoulder. She was not popular in the Senate. She was, however, respected, which was different and in many ways more useful. She had read Venture's report twice before the session began, not just the tactical summary that had been prepared for the senators, the full report, including the personal observations and including the translated message, including the description of the face on the screen. She had read all of it, and she had thought about it carefully, and then she had come to the Senate chamber with something specific to say. She waited until the questions about fleet strength and weapons had exhausted themselves. She waited until the room had settled into the kind of silence that comes after a lot of noise, ushered into the silence where people were beginning to realize that shouting hadn't solved anything. Then she requested the speaking floor and walked down to the center of the chamber and stood where Sarathon had stood. I want to talk about the signal, she said. The room shifted. A few senators looked confused. She kept going. Before Admiral Haros opened fire, the unknown vessel was broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Our own analysts confirmed this. The broadcast was repeating on a regular cycle, clearly deliberate, clearly designed to be received. I can now produce rough but functional translations in their primary language and receive their transmissions with about 60% comprehension accuracy. He paused. It's not perfect, but it's a real conversation, not just fragments. Voss looked at him for a moment. Good, she said again, and meant it more this time. Prepare a broadcast. I'll write it. We'll start transmitting the moment they were within communication range. The broadcast went out 4 hours later when the first contacts were close enough for real-time communication. It was simple. Voss had written it herself, with Obi's help on the translation, and she had gone through 6 drafts before she was satisfied. She wanted it to be clear without being weak, honest without being frightening. She wanted whoever received it to understand exactly what they were dealing with, not a vessel that was begging for mercy, and not a vessel that was threatening them, but a vessel that was making a reasonable choice and explaining why. It said, "This is the UNCC Adamantine Resolve. We know you are coming. We have detected your fleet. We are not running. We are not preparing to fire. We have powered our weapons to minimum standby level only. We are holding our position. We came to this region by accident. We are far from our home, farther than we can easily explain, and we have been searching for a way back for nearly 2 years. We have no territory here. We have no claim here. We want nothing from you except the chance to speak, and, if possible, your help in finding our way home. We fought the last fleet because they fired on us first, after we had spent 40 minutes asking to communicate peacefully. We did not enjoy it. We do not want to fight again. We are one ship, one crew. We have people here who want to go home to their families. We are waiting. Please talk to us. She recorded it in her own voice. It ran it through the translation software, so it played in the Dominion language. Then they broadcast it on every frequency they had, repeating on a 10-minute cycle, and they held their position and waited. The ship sat still in space. The crew went to their stations and maintained readiness without engaging weapons locks. In the mess hall, people ate quietly and spoke in low voices. In engineering, the team ran continuous checks on the reactor, only making sure everything was as stable as possible. In the small medical bay, the ship's doctor inventoried supplies with the calm efficiency of someone who was preparing for possibilities they were choosing not to name out loud. In the navigation room, Obi sat at his station and ran calculations that he had been running for 22 months. He ran them because the captain had told him to keep looking, and he was the kind of person who did what he was told when the person telling him had earned his trust completely. He ran them also because the alternative, accepting that they would never find a way home, was not something he was prepared to accept. Not yet. Maybe not ever. On the bridge, Voss sat in her command chair and drank coffee and watched the contacts on her sensor display move closer. Fleet Admiral Drath Vor received the broadcast when his fleet was still 2 hours out. He was at his command station when it came through, translated imperfect in places, but clear enough in its meaning. He listened to it twice. Then he sat very still for a moment, which was something his bridge crew recognized as the Admiral doing serious thinking and knew not to interrupt. He pulled up the data on the Battle Group Harris engagement. He had read it many times before, but he looked at the specific timeline again. The broadcast that had been going out before the fight, be the 40 minutes of attempted communication that Harris had chosen to ignore, the way the firing had stopped immediately when the last Dominion ship was disabled. He put that alongside the sensor reading now coming in from the Resolve's current position. Stationary weapons on minimum standby, exactly as the broadcast claimed. A ship that was preparing to fight 300 vessels did not power down its weapons. It charged everything it had and tried to pick the most advantageous moment to strike. It definitely did not sit still and broadcast its position and ask to talk. He called his senior staff to the briefing room, which was unusual because senior staff briefings were typically held before engagements, not 2 hours out from them. He showed them the broadcasts. He showed them the sensor readings. He asked for assessments. The assessments were mixed. His weapons officer thought it was a trick, a way of buying time, perhaps, or of drawing the fleet into a specific formation. His intelligence officer thought the broadcast was genuine, but that it didn't matter because their orders were clear. His second-in-command, a veteran named Korath, said nothing for a long time and then said, "Admiral, we have 300 ships and they have 1. If this is a trick, we have more than enough strength to handle whatever they do. If it's not a trick, on our end, we fire anyway. We will have destroyed a vessel that was asking to talk after they already asked to talk once before, and we sent 40 ships to shoot at them instead of answering." Korath paused. "I'm not sure which of those possibilities concerns me more." Drathvor dismissed the briefing and went back to his station. The fleet arrived at the Resolve's position and spread out in a vast encircling formation, 300 warships forming a complete sphere around the single human vessel. On the queue, every weapon system charged, every targeting computer locked and waiting. It was an overwhelming display of force. It was, by any military measurement, an arrangement of power that should have ended any thought of resistance before it began. The adamantine resolve sat in the center of the sphere and did nothing. It didn't move. It didn't charge weapons. It continued broadcasting its message on repeat, and it waited. Drathvor looked at it on his main display for a long time. When he thought about his orders, they were very clear. Find the vessel, destroy it. He thought about the detail that had bothered him from the beginning, the way the weapons had stopped the moment the last Harris ship went dark, a switch being turned off. He thought about Korath's words in the briefing room. He thought about the word his intelligence officer had shown him, translated from the message that had been sent to the escape pod survivor. A single word, the last one in the message. He had looked at the original recording of that communication, something very few people had seen. He had watched the alien face on the screen, the tired eyes, the careful expression. Please. He pressed the communicator on his console. Open a channel, he said. All frequencies. Translation active. He paused. And record everything. There was a brief silence on the bridge. His communications officer looked up at him for just a moment, not questioning, he just noting, and then activated the system. Channel open, Admiral. Drathvor looked at the image of the single ship on his display, a battered, scarred, ancient-looking vessel surrounded by 300 of the finest warships in the Dominion. It looked, in an odd way, like a very old animal that had wandered into a place it didn't belong and was simply standing its ground with a dignity it had no right to have. He found that he did not want to fire at it. He found that more than almost anything he could remember, he did not want to be the person who gave that order. This is Fleet Admiral Drathvor of the Imperial Dominion, he said, and his voice came out steady and careful, the way he spoke when he meant every word. I have received your transmission. I have read the record of your previous communication with our forces. He paused. I am told my orders are to destroy your vessel. He paused again. I am going to deviate from those orders in one respect. I am going to speak with you first. He waited for the transmission delay to carry his words and for the reply to come back. Tell me about yourself. Tell me where you are from. Tell me honestly what you are doing here. I am listening. The resolve was quiet for the 7 seconds it took the signal to travel and come back. Then a voice came through the channel, a human voice translated into Dominion language by a system that had clearly been assembled with great effort from limited data. The voice was rough and tired, and something in the cadence of it, even translated, even filtered through an alien translation algorithm, carried a quality that Drathvor recognized from a lifetime of listening to soldiers. It was honesty. Plain, uncomplicated honesty, the voice of someone who was simply too tired to be anything else than direct. My name is Captain Alar Voss, the voice said. We come from a galaxy called the Milky Way, in which is approximately 2.3 million light-years from here. We entered a spatial anomaly that brought us here by accident 22 months ago, and we have been looking for a way back ever since. A pause. We have a crew of 263 people. We have scientists, engineers, soldiers, a medical team, and a navigator who hasn't slept a full night in almost 2 years trying to find a way back. Another pause, shorter this time. We have not come here to harm anyone. We do not want your territory. We do not understand your politics, and we have no interest in your wars. We want navigational data that might help us find a slip space anomaly that leads back toward our own galaxy. And then we want to go home. The bridge of the Velcro's judgment was completely silent. I understand you have 300 warships surrounding us, Voss continued. I understand those ships have orders to destroy us. I am asking you personally to consider an alternative. A long pause. My crew has families, children, some of them, parents waiting at home not knowing what happened to them. Her voice didn't change. It stayed steady, professional, but the weight behind the words was impossible to miss. We just want to go home, Admiral. That is the beginning and the end of it.
That was what mattered. On the day before the resolve was scheduled to depart, Ifis made an unusual request. She asked if it was possible to speak directly, visually, face-to-face, over the channel, with Drathvor and any of his staff who were willing. It was unusual. Everything about this situation was unusual. Drathfor agreed. He gathered his bridge crew around the communication screen. Most of them had never seen a human face, and they stood in a half circle and they looked at the screen and tried to maintain the professional composure of Dominion naval officers, while their expressions said clearly enough for anyone to read that this was the strangest and most remarkable thing they had ever experienced. On the screen, Ivos looked back at them. She was sitting at what appeared to be the command station of her bridge, and her crew was arrayed behind her in a similar arrangement. 263 people, when it felt like all crowded in to see, though of course it was only a fraction of that, as many as the camera could capture. They were all different from each other in ways that Drathfor found fascinating. Different heights, different skin colors, different ages, in different states of tidiness and uniform regulation compliance. They looked like a crew that had been through a very long expedition and had stopped worrying about the small things a while ago. They looked happy, he realized. Not joyous, too tired for that, but genuinely, quietly happy. The particular happiness of people who had been afraid for a very long time and had just been given a reason to hope. Ivos's face, for the first time in all their hours of conversation, showed something other than careful professionalism. There was a smile on it, not large, but real. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, with a face attached to it, so it means something more than words on a channel. She paused, and, "I know what you risked to make this happen, Admiral. I know it wasn't a simple choice. I know you had orders, and I know what following orders and not following orders can cost a person in a military structure." She looked directly at the camera. "You did something brave. I wanted you to know that a lot of people understand that." Drathfor didn't answer immediately. He was not accustomed to being thanked. The Dominion fleet was not a place where thanks were commonly expressed. When he found that he didn't entirely know what to do with it, he settled for honesty. "You also did something braver," he said, "sitting still while 300 ships surrounded you, not fighting, waiting." He paused. "That is harder than fighting. I think many people in my fleet would not have been capable of it." Voss was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We've had a lot of practice." The adamantine resolve left the following morning. It departed slowly at first, Ivos moving through the outer edge of the fleet formation as the Dominion warships cleared a path. The 300 ships held their positions in a vast spread across space. The single human vessel moved between them and out the other side, and then accelerated away into the dark. Drathfor watched it go on his main display. He watched it until it was too small to see with the naked eye and only visible on the sensor screen. He watched it until Obi's calculations, he fed by the Dominion navigational data, took the resolve toward the outer regions where the anomaly data suggested a possible return point. Then it jumped. Not a Dominion-style jump, not the clean, established fold of a properly mapped hyperlane. Something faster, stranger, less predictable. A bright flash of distorted space that the resolve punched through like a needle through cloth, and then it was gone. The sensors recorded a stress signature in local space that faded within seconds. Gone. 1 bajillion light-years toward home, hopefully, or at least towards somewhere that might lead there, carrying Obi's calculations and the navigational charts and the months of data Obi had built up. All of it now finally given the context it had been missing. The bridge of the Velkar's judgment was quiet. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we have a response from Velkara, from the Emperor's office." Drathfor turned. "Read it." The communications officer read it. It was not a pleasant message. It detailed at length Drathfor's violations of direct orders, his insubordination in copying Senator Lorene's office with classified communications, his failure to perform his assigned mission, and his general conduct as a fleet officer over the preceding days. It informed him that he would face a formal review board upon his return to Velkara. He listened to it with the same expression he had worn throughout everything else. Steady, patient, not afraid. "Acknowledge receipt," he said. He looked at the space where the resolve had been. Then he looked at the debris field still visible at the edge of sensor range, the remnants of the 40 ships from the first engagement. Then he looked at his bridge crew, the people who had stood beside him through this, who had watched him make choices they hadn't been sure about and had stayed with him anyway. His communications officer was watching him. "Admiral," the young officer said carefully, Should we report it as a victory? Drathfor thought about Ivos's face on the screen, the tired smile, the thanks that came with a face attached to it. He thought about 300 ships surrounding one battered vessel, and that vessel sitting still and waiting, and asking with complete sincerity to be heard. He thought about what winning and losing actually meant when you took them out of the context of weapons and body counts, and put them into the context of what kind of people you chose to be. Report it as a warning, he said quietly, to ourselves about what we almost did. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a moment. Then Kor, standing to his left, made a low sound that might have been agreement and turned back to his station. One by one, the rest of the bridge crew did the same, back to their consoles, back to their work, back to the ordinary business of a fleet that had just been part of something extraordinary and was now figuring out what came after. In the Senate on Velkara, Senator Laureen Akera filed a formal record of the engagement and its resolution, and made sure it was entered into the permanent Imperial Archives in the way that all official records were sealed for a period, then eventually public. Mars, she made sure the record was complete, not just the military parts, all of it. The signal before the first battle that nobody had answered, the word at the end of the message to the escape pod, the 4 hours of conversation between an admiral and a captain who were trying very hard to understand each other. She wanted it in the record because she understood something that the Emperor and the military hawks and the frightened senators did not yet fully understand, that something had happened here that was bigger than a battle or a political decision, that somewhere out in a galaxy they couldn't reach, there were people who sent a ship so far from home that finding the way back had taken years of work and hope and refusal to give up. When those people had been surrounded and outgunned and given every reason in the world to fight, they had chosen to sit still and wait and ask in broken translation software for a chance to be heard. And eventually, someone had listened. She wanted that in the record because she believed, she genuinely, deeply believed, that it was going to matter. Not just now, later, years from now, decades from now, when other choices had to be made and other meetings had to happen. She wanted someone in the future to be able to look back at this moment and see what had been possible and what had been chosen. She filed the record and went to the window and looked out at Velkara, the towers and the lights in the city that never truly slept. Above it, the sky was full of stars. Among those stars, impossibly far away, 263 people were going home. She thought that was worth knowing about. She thought that was worth remembering. Somewhere in the dark between galaxies, the adamantine resolve was running hard. Captain Erebos sat in her command chair with a fresh cup of coffee and watched the stars move on the main screen. Different stars than the ones she had grown up watching, different stars than the ones she had navigated by for her entire career, but stars nonetheless. The universe was full of them. That had always been for her a source of comfort rather than fear. So much of it out there, so much to find. Obi was at his station. He had not slept in 32 hours. He had the Dominion navigational charts spread across 3 screens and his own calculations on a 4th, and he was working through them with the focused, rapid energy of someone who had been given a key to a lock they'd been staring at for almost 2 years. "Captain," Obi said without looking up. "Obi, I think I have it." He paused. The bridge went very quiet. "There's an anomaly signature about 4 months from our current position, consistent with slipspace activity in a region the Dominion charts describe as navigationally unstable, which, based on what happened to us 2 years ago, is probably why we ended up here in the first place." He looked up from his screens. His eyes were red from tiredness, but the expression in them was something she hadn't seen in a long time. "If I'm reading this right, and I am fairly confident I'm reading this right, that's a door home. 4 months. After 2 years, 4 months was almost nothing. Voss looked at her navigator for a moment. Then she looked around the bridge at the crew that had been through everything with her, that had survived the wrong turn, and the 2 years of searching, and the fights they hadn't wanted, and the diplomacy they hadn't been trained for. She looked at all of them, and they looked back at her, and nobody said anything that felt equal to the moment. She turned back to the front. "Set course," she said, and the adamantine resolve ran on through the dark.